Welcome to Mystery in Known Files. If you're here, it means you share the same curiosity that drives us to uncover the untold stories, the chilling truths, and the mysteries that linger in silence long after the headlines fade. Tonight, I want to take you back to a case that has haunted investigators, shattered a family, and left behind questions that demand answers. It begins like a love story. A young couple setting out on what should have been a peaceful life together, full of dreams and new beginnings. But hidden in the shadows was a darkness no one could have predicted. The wife carried the joy of new life within her, while the husband, unaware, was about to face a fate far more tragic. What unfolded was not just a crime, it was a chilling tale of survival, loss, and a fight for justice that spanned years. This isn't just another story, it's a journey into the depths of human resilience, the cruelty of betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of truth. So, stay with me, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Mystery Unknown Files so you won't miss what comes next. In July of 1999, Jennifer Thompson and her husband David packed up their car, eager for a weekend surrounded by nature. Jennifer was 5 months pregnant, glowing with the anticipation of becoming a mother after years of trying. Friends and family recalled how hopeful they both were, how much they looked forward to starting a new chapter together. But that chapter never came. When they failed to return home, search teams scoured the park. Rangers found their campsite untouched, a tent still standing, food carefully stored away, even Jennifer's favorite jacket folded by the fire pit. Yet Jennifer and David were gone. No footprints led away, no evidence pointed to an accident, no trace of a struggle. For weeks, the park echoed with helicopters, dogs, and desperate calls of their names, but the vast wilderness kept its secrets. 6 months later, the official explanation suggested they had been lost or fallen victim to Yellowstone's unforgiving wildlife. For authorities, the case went cold. But for Jennifer's sister Rebecca, it was never that simple, and she would spend the next 11 years searching for answers. For 11 long years, the Yellowstone wilderness had offered nothing but silence. Each summer, Rebecca Martinez returned to the trails where her sister and brother-in-law had vanished, driven by instinct more than hope. She combed riverbanks, traced ridgelines, and searched among the pines, never finding so much as a thread of fabric. Friends told her to move on. Investigators had closed the file. But in her heart, Rebecca believed there was something out there, waiting to be found. Then, on an ordinary morning in August, her phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Michael Chen, a hiker who had been trekking near Shoshone Lake, one of Yellowstone's most remote corners. He spoke carefully, almost as if afraid she might hang up. "I think I found something," he said. "It looks like a backpack. The name stitched inside says David Thompson." Rebecca's pulse quickened. She had learned, after years of false leads, to guard herself against hope. But she knew this call was different. She arranged to meet Michael within hours, hiking out to the location he described. There, half buried beneath pine needles and weather-worn from years of harsh winters, lay her brother-in-law's pack. Inside were personal belongings that time had not erased: David's compass, a folded map marked with their route, and even a photograph of Jennifer. Smiling in the sunday, hands trembling, Rebecca reached for her phone. For the first time in more than a decade, she dialed a number she had nearly given up on. Special Agent Sarah Coleman of the FBI, who had led the original case back in 1999. When Coleman answered, Rebecca's voice was steady but urgent. "Agent Coleman, it's Rebecca Martinez. We found David's backpack. You need to meet us at Shoshone Lake immediately." It was the moment Rebecca had been waiting for. A single discovery that would tear open a case once left for dead and lead to truths more haunting than she could have ever imagined. When Rebecca placed that call from the edge of Shoshone Lake, the FBI had little reason to revisit a case long thought buried beneath time and wilderness. Yet Agent Sarah Coleman, who had carried the Thompson file in the back of her mind for more than a decade, knew the significance of finding David's backpack. She drove straight from her Denver field office, arriving at the lake within hours. Standing in the thin mountain air, she examined the worn straps, the water-stained map, and the photograph tucked inside. This was no coincidence. No piece of camping debris washed ashore. It was evidence. Coleman returned to headquarters with a renewed urgency. Within days, the Bureau authorized the formation of a specialized task force. She handpicked her team: Lisa Park, a seasoned agent who had cracked cold cases across the Rockies; Michael Torres, a digital forensic specialist fluent in the language of hidden records and encrypted files; and Hayes Morrison, an investigator with a background in human trafficking. Each brought a different skill set, but together they shared a single mission: to uncover what had really happened to Jennifer and David Thompson. As the team reviewed the original files, one name surfaced again and again in subtle, almost forgotten footnotes: Dennis Kruger. A seasonal park ranger employed during the summer of 1999, Kruger's record appeared unremarkable at first glance. Officially, he had been let go in January 2000 due to budget cuts. But deeper in his personnel file were troubling annotations, comments about erratic behavior, inappropriate remarks toward female campers, and a psychological evaluation that hinted at darker obsessions with family and child welfare. To Coleman, the pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't a case of lost hikers or an unlucky encounter with Yellowstone's wildlife. It was the beginning of a human crime, calculated and concealed. For Rebecca, the reopening of the investigation was more than vindication. It was the first time in 11 years that her instincts had been taken seriously. And for the FBI task force, it was a race against time to determine whether Jennifer's story had ended in 1999 or if traces of her life might still be waiting to be found. The deeper the FBI task force dug into Dennis Kruger's past, the more unsettling the picture became. His employment record, once dismissed as unremarkable, told a story of constant movement. He had worked as a seasonal ranger not only in Yellowstone, but in Glacier National Park, the Grand Tetons, and several national forests across the West. Each assignment ended abruptly, always explained by budget changes or staff reductions. Yet when the team cross-referenced dates, something disturbing emerged. Unsolved disappearances shadowed his trail. Families had filed missing person reports in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. The cases had never been linked, but now the parallels were impossible to ignore. Rebecca Martinez sat across from Agent Sarah Coleman in a Denver field office conference room, her hands trembling as she slid a small box across the table. Inside were photographs of Jennifer and David from family gatherings, vacations, even Jennifer's ultrasound pictures. If he watched them, if he followed them, Rebecca said, these might help you understand what he saw. Her willingness to reopen old wounds gave the team a more personal lens, and Coleman promised her that this time, the Bureau would not let the case go dark. By late fall, the task force had mapped Kruger's current routines. He lived quietly on the outskirts of Billings, Montana, working odd jobs, blending into the background. But surveillance suggested something darker. He frequented remote trailheads alone, often carrying heavy packs, yet returning with nothing. He lingered near campgrounds longer than a man without family should. The agents began to wonder if he was still hunting, still seeking opportunities in the wilderness. Preparation for surveillance was meticulous. Torres outfitted vehicles with long-range cameras and GPS trackers. Park coordinated with local law enforcement to avoid alerting Kruger. Every move was documented, every pattern logged. What had begun as a cold case was now alive with urgency. For Rebecca, each report brought her closer to answers, though she feared what those answers might reveal. For the FBI, the mission was clear. If Kruger had taken Jennifer and David, they needed proof, and they needed it before he disappeared into the wild again. When the FBI finally secured a warrant for Dennis Kruger's property in the remote woods of Idaho, no one on the task force could have predicted what they were about to uncover. The cabin looked ordinary from the outside, just another weathered structure hidden among the pines, its chimney leaning slightly, the porch sagging from decades of snow and rain. But once the agents forced open the door, the air inside told a different story. It was cold, sterile, and faintly metallic, like a room that had been scrubbed too many times. What they found inside stopped them in their tracks. In a back room, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, sat an array of medical equipment, an examination table, surgical tools, oxygen tanks, even a small incubator. This wasn't camping gear or survivalist hoarding. It was the setup of someone who had prepared for childbirth, someone who intended to control every aspect of another person's life. The next discovery was equally chilling. Against one wall stood a makeshift forgery workshop. There were stacks of blank birth certificates, laminating machines, old typewriters, and sealed envelopes marked with state insignias. Kruger hadn't just hidden people he had tried to erase and recreate them, but it was a single piece of paper, torn and smudged, that broke the case wide open. Tucked inside a weathered journal, agents found a handwritten note. The ink was shaky, the words desperate. "My name is Jennifer Thompson. I was taken. David was killed. My son was born the 3rd of December, 1999. The signature matched samples from Jennifer's college notebooks, confirming its authenticity. For Agent Coleman, the note was both devastating and clarifying. It meant Jennifer had survived long enough to give birth, that David's fate had been sealed in violence, and that somewhere out there was a child who might still be alive. Rebecca wept when she was shown the evidence, her grief and hope colliding in equal measure. For years, she had carried the burden of being the only one who refused to let the case go cold. Now, with proof in hand, the tragedy was undeniable, but so was the possibility of finding Jennifer's son. The note found in Kruger's cabin had rewritten everything the investigators thought they knew. Jennifer had delivered her son, and the boy was somewhere out there living a life built on lies. With fresh urgency, the FBI launched a new mission: track the child. Paper trails were faint, scattered across years and state lines, but digital forensics and old adoption records began to piece together a path. It seemed that after Jennifer's captivity, Kruger had moved the baby frequently, handing him off to caretakers under forged documents whenever suspicion grew too close. The trail eventually led to a quiet suburb in Oregon. There, a boy around 11 years old lived with the Stevens family, well respected in their community, active in church, known for volunteering at local shelters. By every account, they adored the child as their own. What haunted investigators was that the Stevens had no idea the adoption papers they'd been handed over a decade earlier were fraudulent. For them, this was their son. Surveillance confirmed what the files suggested. The boy was healthy, thriving in school, and unaware of the storm of secrets surrounding his birth. Agent Coleman described the dilemma as the hardest decision of her career. On one side stood the law, and with it, the Thompsons' right to know the truth about their grandson. On the other was the fragile mind of a child whose world could be shattered overnight. Rebecca Martinez wept when she learned the news. For years, she had prayed that Jennifer's baby had survived. Now, that prayer had been answered, but it came with a weight she hadn't anticipated. Should she fight to bring him into the family, or should she allow the boy to remain with the only parents he had ever known? The case had begun as a search for justice, but now it asked a deeper, more human question. When the truth collides with love, which do you protect first? The moment Rebecca Martinez had waited for more than a decade finally arrived. After years of searching, grieving, and hoping against hope, she now stood face to face with Michael the boy, who carried her sister Jennifer's eyes and her brother-in-law David's quiet strength. Yet, This was not a dramatic reunion filled with embraces and tears. It had to be slower, gentler, like guiding a child across a fragile bridge that connected two very different worlds. The FBI arranged the first meeting in a neutral, calm setting, with the Stevens family present. Michael was shy at first, clinging to the only parents he had ever known. Rebecca resisted the urge to overwhelm him with stories, and instead began with something simple: a photograph of Jennifer holding him as a newborn. His brow furrowed, his young mind piecing together questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. Over the following weeks, Rebecca returned with more photographs: family gatherings, David's camping trips, Jennifer's college graduation. Each picture opened a small window, and through those windows Michael began to glimpse the life he had been denied. He asked questions cautiously at first. What were my parents like? Did they love me? Why didn't they come for me sooner? Rebecca answered with patience and honesty, never pushing beyond what he was ready to hear. Trust grew slowly. Rebecca made sure their conversations weren't only about loss and tragedy, but also about hope, laughter, and the kind of everyday love that builds a family. She told him how Jennifer had always been the protective older sister, how David had dreamed of teaching him to fish in Yellowstone, how his first cry had brought tears of joy into a cold hospital room. Step by step, Michael began to bridge the gap between his past and his present. It wasn't about replacing the Stevens family, nor was it about erasing the pain of what had happened. It was about giving him the gift of truth and a connection to the people who had loved him before he ever took his first breath. The courtroom was packed with reporters, families of victims, and federal agents who had poured years of work into unraveling the twisted web Dennis Kruger had spun. For so long, he had been nothing more than a shadow, a name whispered among investigators with little more than suspicions attached. But now, seated in front of a federal judge, Kruger could no longer hide behind forged documents, false identities, or the remote isolation of his Idaho cabin. The truth was about to come crashing down. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece, beginning with the cabin discovery. Photographs of the hidden medical room, shelves stacked with falsified birth certificates, and detailed ledgers recording movements of children shocked even the most hardened investigators. But it was Jennifer's handwritten note pleading for her son's future, confirming David's murder that pierced the courtroom like a knife. You could hear the sharp intake of breath as the jury read her words projected on the screen. Charges mounted one after another: kidnapping, first-degree murder, human trafficking, and conspiracy. Witnesses testified about Kruger's past positions in medical facilities across multiple states, where disappearances coincided with his presence. Former associates admitted under oath that he forged documents for traffickers, disguising stolen children as legitimate adoptions. The case went beyond Jennifer and David. Families from across the country came forward, learning that their own tragedies had been tied to the same network Kruger had supported. For them, this trial was not just about punishing one man, but exposing an entire system that preyed on the vulnerable. Kruger sat expressionless throughout much of the testimony, but his silence could not erase the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning with guilty verdicts on all major counts. In that moment, the weight of years of unanswered questions and unbearable grief shifted into something else: accountability, long overdue. The trial was more than a conviction. It was a public reckoning. It revealed how far evil could reach when hidden in plain sight, and it reminded everyone in that courtroom that persistence, truth, and the courage of families like Rebecca's could break even the darkest chains. In the months following Dennis Kruger's conviction, the ripple effects of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. What had started as a haunting mystery involving Jennifer and David became a catalyst for change, reshaping the way law enforcement and communities confronted the issue of missing persons and trafficking. Out of tragedy came something profoundly human: the Jennifer Thompson Foundation. Founded by Rebecca Martinez Alongside advocates and families who had endured similar heartbreak, the foundation became a lifeline for those still searching for answers. Its mission was simple but powerful: to support families of the missing, provide resources for searches, and offer emotional guidance in the face of uncertainty. Within its first year, the foundation had already connected hundreds of families with investigators, trauma specialists, and legal advisors. It gave a voice to those who had long felt invisible. The FBI, deeply impacted by the revelations of the case, instituted a sweeping reform known as the Jennifer Thompson Protocol. It was a standardized approach, specifically designed for cases involving pregnant women and child trafficking, two of the most vulnerable groups, too often overlooked in fragmented investigations. This protocol emphasized rapid coordination across states, digital forensics, and specialized victim support units. For agents who had walked through Kruger's cabin and read Jennifer's desperate note, it was more than procedure. It was a promise that her suffering would not be in vain. The legacy also carried into law enforcement operations nationwide. Kruger's conviction had cracked open a much larger network, and in the months that followed, multiple suspects across different states were arrested. Fake adoption rings were dismantled, traffickers exposed, and children who had been missing for years were finally identified and reunited with their families. For Rebecca, watching these changes unfold was bittersweet. She had lost her sister and brother-in-law, yet their story became a beacon that pushed institutions to act with greater urgency. The case of Jennifer and David Thompson was no longer just about loss. It had become a legacy of resilience, reform, and relentless pursuit of justice. Years later, Michael grew into the kind of young man his parents would have been proud of. The boy, once caught in the shadows of a nightmare, became a symbol of resilience. He often spoke of his dream to study law or enter social work, determined to fight for children who could not yet fight for themselves. His strength wasn't born out of bitterness, but out of the love that slowly pieced his life back together. The story of Jennifer and David Thompson does not end with their loss. It lives on through Michael's courage, through the foundation that bears Jennifer's name, and through every family that has found hope because of their legacy. It reminds us that even in the darkest chapters, justice and healing are possible when people refuse to give up. If this story moved you, I invite you to stay connected. On this channel, we share stories of mystery, justice, and the human will to overcome. Subscribe, join the community, and let's keep these conversations alive, because remembering isn't just about the past, it's about building a better future together.